There is no one who knows your child, your teen, your young adult, your grandchild, your student, whatever it is, better than you do. And with a full set of tools in your hand, or as many tools as you can manage, you can do a tremendous amount of the work in your day-to-day life. I'm not suggesting that you become a therapist, but I am suggesting that recognizing that just learning to talk or just learning to give a greeting is not the whole picture of this. So I picked the 4 areas that I see as most important in what I do. Now, that's not to say that's the only thing we do, and you've probably heard speakers all weekend who will help you with some of those other things. But today, we're going to talk about communication, we're going to talk about emotional regulation, executive function, and also being a meaningful part of a family. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is don't make any assumptions. If you're working with a speech therapist, your speech therapist should have all of this in their radar. Your OTs should have these things in their radar. All of these things go together. And when I think about guiding parents in the process of bringing on more development for their children, this is the way I think about it. First, we have to build prior knowledge. I cannot stress enough to you that one of the biggest obstacles that we encounter related to reading comprehension, critical thinking skills, is a lack of prior knowledge. Because our loved ones, children, don't necessarily absorb information from their environment like a neurotypical child would. So we have to work hard to build prior knowledge. What does it mean to go to the circus? I know that's a sensory nightmare, but how could you replicate something in your home or with other families with autism that would help your child gain prior knowledge about the circus? The second step is we have to model. And so one of the things that help our children, and not to the point where it's rigid and we can't be flexible, but we need to accentuate the observable patterns in our work with children. And so you're going to see me talk about some of those today. So you're going to model, then you're going to guide. We're going to talk about you have to use language and steps to help your children visualize the end product and then work your way back to the start. If you can't visualize the end product of something that you're doing or sharing with another person, it becomes incredibly difficult to not be on edge, to not be anxious if you don't know where you're going or what the end product's going to look like. So we really need to look at guide. And then we want to think about practicing it. We're going to talk today about praising authentically. And Christy will attest to this. I frequently am pushing my parents to transfer more responsibility to their children. We do too much for our kids. We have to get them ready to go out into the world. And so that last step, only support when support is needed. Otherwise, let them fly. So the first thing we're going to talk about is emotional regulation. I know you probably can't read all those words, but those are all emotion words. That's a huge map. It's a huge map for you or I. So we can only imagine how daunting this is for an individual on the autism spectrum. When you pull down the presentation, when you're back at home, or if you already have, at the center are the 6 basic emotions. We are going to think about, most children learn happy, mad, and sad first, and then we get to fear and disgust and surprise. And so from out that, we can grow emotion words in our English language at that level. So it's very challenging. So the next few slides are taken from a chapter in the CERTS manual, and I have huge respect for CERTS, social communication, emotional regulation, and transactional supports. It's the work of Barry Prezant and Amy Weatherby and our own Emily Rubin, who is here in the Atlanta area now. And we're very glad to have her. When she started working on this, she was a lowly grad student, and now she's, she's up there with all of the other amazing people who guide this field. But emotional regulation is the ability to balance internal and external factors so that you are available and you can respond in an adaptive way and function in the context you're in. I see emotional regulation as being something that sometimes gets overlooked in favor of sensory issues. There's no doubt that sensory issues are there, but we also have to make sure that our children, our teens, our young adults are learning the language of emotions. If you look there, you can see the 5 domains of emotional regulation. If you have not seen this book, this is the best explanation of emotional regulation that I've ever read. The next one is a little bit a freebie in your slides, because I'm not going to go into great detail on this, but it too comes from the certs. But if you go down the bullet points, you'll see social, and did I say social? Social is so tied to emotional regulation. You can't be available to be with people if you are not emotionally regulated. But I am also going to spend a little bit of time on this, in that there are 3 levels of strategies to achieve emotional regulation. The first one is the behavioral level. And think, the image I always put in my mind is, in the beginning, we rock children on our hips. How many of you, even standing today, would be going like this? Right? We rock children, so we are providing some behavioral response that helps to regulate that small child. We see many different ways that behavior becomes an emotional regulation. I'm going to withdraw, or I'm going to aggress. All of these emotional areas get played out in behaviors in what we're working with our individuals on the autism spectrum. These are in developmental order, so the next order are language strategies. And you can use words, or this can be symbols. And I'm going to jump up and down here, okay? If your children do not have the language of emotions, you are crippling them in their reading comprehension, their social opportunities, and their life in your family, and as you prepare them to be able to be out in the world. So if your child is nonverbal, you still need to be working on the basic emotions and how to talk about them. So it is more sophisticated to use a language strategy. A language strategy could be pointing to the pecs that says mad. A language strategy might be, for some of our kids who talk too much, might be, I am so mad at mom, you just are always making me crazy. So that's a language strategy. Maybe not the best presentation of it, but it's a strategy. And then in neurotypical children, by the time we get to about 5 or 6 years of age, we begin to see metacognitive strategies. And anytime you see the word metacognitive, it means you're able to think about your thinking. And at this point, we see children begin to think things in their own head that they don't have to say out loud. So many of our children cannot do that yet. And they use what they're thinking in their head to help regulate their emotions. There are 2 methods that children use to achieve emotional regulation, and this is in developmental order. Mutual regulation, that means they're borrowing you or their teachers or their parapros or their grandparents' emotional regulation. So here's your critical role. If your child is dysregulated and you are dysregulated because your child is dysregulated, this is what you end up with. A great, big, huge explosion. So it's the time to take a deep breath, to breathe. To take a deep breath, breathe, and be what you want your child to be. Slow your voice. Don't move rapidly. Pause and use silence. We're going to talk a lot about silence later. And then as children age, they get to the point where they can self-regulate. The example I always use for this is, you came here to a conference and you may have come with a spouse, you may have come with a friend, but you might have come by yourself and you didn't know anyone. But you've probably been to other conferences in your life. And so you use the information that you've acquired in your prior knowledge, remember that from our stair-stepping, you use that information to say, okay, this is what happens at conference. I go to the desk, I check in, I need to find the bathrooms, I need to find where my first room is. You use that information and you're not saying it out loud, you're doing it in your own head. And that helps you to be regulated in an unfamiliar environment. We had acquired that just by natural development. Okay, so we're going to talk about the vocabulary of emotions. As I said, happy, sad, mad, surprised, scared, and disgust. The kids love disgust. So you can talk about all kinds of disgusting things and start looking at words and figurative phrases that describe that. And then a lot of times we're talking to a child or a teen who may only have the concept of happy and mad, and we're talking about pride. Well, look at the list that comes with those higher cognitive emotions. They're very socially based. They're not as innate. They're culturally dependent, and they are more than anything tied to the context. And so it might be worth your while to work on those basic emotions first, okay? The other thing that we know, and raise your hand if you have a child, or you love a child or young adult who sees the world in black and white, okay? All right? In a black and white world, you are either happy or you're not. If you're not happy, you're either sad or you're mad. So think back to that circular chart map of emotion words that I put up there. You have to have degrees of emotions, but how can you think about degrees of emotions if you don't know the words? And how can you even be aware that there are degrees of emotions? So one of the most important things you can do this one emotion at a time. Don't try this for all 6 at the same time. Your child will run screaming from the room. But your family can begin talking about happy in degrees. So a little bit of happy is glad. A lot of happy is thrilled. And with a child who's further along the way, I would fill in these other 2 degrees and help them find. Now, I do want you, if you do this with your children, to think about taking into consideration their personality and their preferences, but I also would like for you to drive at consensus, what most people would say, about a context that makes you glad. So, you're glad Dad came home from work. You're happy that it's your birthday, but you're thrilled that you're going to get to go to Disney World. And help them map the context that go with the emotions. One of the reasons to do that also is when your child and children can be emotionally dysregulated when they're giddy, if the context doesn't match giddy. And a lot of our kids use that as an escape or to manage sensory. And so if they're giddy and they should just be glad, that's a time when you can say, how big is your emotion? How small is our situation? Maybe our emotion needs to be a little smaller. But if you don't build the prior knowledge of these words, and that there can be more than one, and remember I said start with the basics first, but once you're through the basics, then it's time to start working on, they come in degrees, and they are tied to context. This was presented by Emily Rubin at, this concept was presented by Emily Rubin at one of our state speech pathology conferences, and I use it all the time. We want to help children move from mutual regulation, where they're borrowing from your frontal lobe and your emotional regulation, to where they can self-regulate. We want them to move from behavioral to language. If they already have language, we want them to be able to get to the metacognitive stage. But if I flipped this over, there would be 5 or 6. Usually I don't think I have anybody that I'm using all 6. Under I feel sad, it might say I feel happy, I feel angry. And then on the back of each one of those is a set of strategies that your child can use to emotionally regulate. This, although you may have to walk them to this or show them and guide them through the decision making, you are beginning to give them the language of emotions, and you are also beginning to transfer the responsibility. Which one of those strategies would you like to use to match the emotions of our context? Okay. I have a plethora of teenagers in my practice now. And teenagers, as we know, are often a different little creature there. And sometimes they can be somewhat challenging, lovable but challenging. And by the time they're teens, so many of our young people know how hard this is for them. And so now that they've got some of the emotions, but they're still sorting out, when is it I'm supposed to be thrilled and when is it I'm supposed to be glad? How do I show that I'm angry, really angry, when I feel that way and do it in an appropriate manner? That we often see our children caught in the cycle of negative emotions. So negative thoughts lead to negative feelings, which will lead to negative behaviors. And so we have to guide our children to help them understand that when we sense those negative thoughts, we have to, see my bell there? We have to interrupt it, and we need to jump to new and positive cycles. And this comes from the research, and we all do it too. When January came, and I thought, well, I really should lose a little more weight. My negative thoughts filled right in. Well, you've never been, and I start down the emotions. My feelings feel that way. Well, let's go have some pizza, right? We do this. This is human nature, but we have the ability to say, I'm going to change this, and many of our children don't. And so we need to start thinking about the new and positive cycles of positive thoughts, positive feelings, and positive behaviors. This creature, when the child is caught in that cycle, we call the inner critic. And this becomes the inner coach. And we spend time thinking about, what does a critic say? Someone who's criticizing you, what kind of words are they going to use? What kind of words does an inner coach say? And how is that beneficial to you? Okay? Let's talk about executive functioning, and this is going to be the world's fastest breeze through executive function because it's a very complex area. Again, I'm going to ask you to not assume that one therapy is working at this. You have power in your home to help children become more aware of how to direct their attention to the proper information. So there we are again. Build, model, guide, practice, and praise authentically, and transfer responsibility. All right, here's the great big long definition. How many of you are currently working with a professional or trying at home to help your child conquer executive functioning issues? Way to go, guys. You're doing great. This is so important. Everybody wants their children to initiate with peers. We assume that's a social problem, but it might be an executive function problem. If we can't initiate in new context, because we can't solve the problem of what's going on in that context, then we're not going to start a conversation with people. So it is multi-layered, and I'm asking you to look at it from all those different layers. So here's the listing: inhibiting, self-monitoring, shifting, employ emotional control, which goes back to our emotional regulation that we've already talked about, the ability to initiate, to hold on to information in your working memory, to plan and to organize. So working to achieve a goal, cleaning up your room, having your science fair project done, whatever it is, requires the ability to think about the future. When we look at the teachings of Sarah Ward, how many of you have enjoyed the presence of Sarah Ward? Ryan's way back in the back, Christy. Sarah Ward is, if you have a chance to go hear Sarah Ward speak, and she's in your area, even if it's a school district thing and you find out she's coming, please go hear her. She is where the rubber meets the road in executive functioning. So you have to be able to think forward about the future, and that requires theory of mind and perspective taking. To plan or to achieve a goal, you have to hold on to the idea of, I'm here, this is my present self, but there can be a future self, and you've got to be able to move back and forth between the two. It's complex. So I'm going to ask you, for some of the areas that you probably have the most battles with your children about, to think about going about this a different way. From future thinking to planning backwards. So you can see that the final vase down there on the right is everything looks great. And if we go back, we can see where we started with an empty vase, and flower by flower, it improved. One of the things that Sarah Ward talks a lot about is plan the work and then work the plan. Please, and if you leave here with nothing else, please know that unless you're in an incredibly, and I love my public school teachers dearly, I worked alongside them for years, but if you think that your child is going to get this training in their classroom, I would ask you to go and find out if that's really what's occurring. So, can your child visualize the end? Do they know what their room looks like when it's clean? Have they ever done a science fair project? Or have they ever done one where it wasn't a whole family nightmare? Science fair projects are my bugaboo. I can't stand them. I have 2 adult children, so you do survive them. So we're going to talk a little bit about making a rubric for the rubric. Many schools now, and it's a great thing that they're doing, they're providing children with rubrics for how they're going to be graded and due dates for each step along a project, those types of things. But for our kids, we need a rubric about the rubric. And you are the person who needs to sit with them and help them figure that out. Another thing that Sarah Ward talks about a lot is get ready, do, done. Every task has 3 phases. And notice the way she numbers it. Done is number 1. So we're not trying to get them to get ready to do something they can't picture yet. We need to help them make the picture of what it's going to look like. Every problem on the math page is going to be done. You're going to have put it in your notebook. You're going to put your notebook in your backpack to go back to school tomorrow. Whatever it is, you have to help them build that picture. Your child may actually need photographs to accomplish this. And so whatever it takes to begin to transfer those executive function skills, you need to start working on. So you start with what it's going to look like when it's done. Then we're going to figure out the steps that will get me there, and then the get ready. And she also has a get done, which is a clean up, put everything away type of phase. All right, time. Is anybody struggling to help their child learn how to manage, to think about time, period? I see heads nodding. Elapsed time is one of the most difficult concepts taught in elementary school. And of course, every test by the time you're in 3rd grade is going to have 3-word problems on elapsed time. And even neurotypical children struggle immensely with this. I want you to get rid of digital clocks. Digital clocks do not teach the passing of time, okay? They may be easier, they may be a shortcut, but if you truly want your child to begin to understand time, they have to begin to see the passing of it. Now that clock there, not the time timer, but the other one, you'll see that I've highlighted, we have 30 minutes for whatever it is our task is. Back here, my done and get done should be 5 minutes of that. My get ready should be 5 minutes of it. And my do should be the bigger bulk of it. So often, especially when we're working in groups, get ready is the whole time. And our children don't know how to see that time. So if you highlight, buy a plain, basic, non-fancy analog clock, get yourself a great marker that you can wipe off, the vis-a-vis markers, and outline the amount of time that it takes. You can also use a time timer. And they come on phone apps and computer apps now. I prefer, depending on the child, to use the clock, because if you look at the time timer, it counts minutes, but it doesn't display the hours to them as well. And our goal down the road is to have an adult who, to the best of their ability, can do the things that matter in their life. And working is among the tops of those lists, not just for income, but we have research that shows us that individuals on the autism spectrum that are adults, if they are gainfully employed, even if it's part-time, it's something they enjoy, and they enjoy the people, that their health is better, their emotions are better, that they lead a better quality of life. When they are an adult, they need to get to the point where they look at a clock and not a time timer, okay? Okay, we talked about long-term projects, and this, again, all comes from the teaching of Sarah Ward. You're gonna sit side by side with a child and work through the rubric. You're gonna create a rubric in a rubric alongside your student. I go into a step further, and we cut the steps apart. We attach them to the specified day on a blank calendar page. Make a copy of the original in case you lose the calendar page. And that way the child can see every step along the way. And it reveals to them in small chunks and what it will take to arrive at that future picture. The more you do this, the more equipped they will become in executive functioning, and you'll be able to transfer more fully. I also, Christy will attest to this, I'm kind of outspoken about how much time we're letting our children spend on computers. And they're here. We're not going to get rid of them. Our smartphones, whatever it is. But please don't let your children do things on computers that you're not sitting with them, or a qualified peer or adult isn't, because it's so detrimental to being social with people. But while we've got this great technology there, if you have a teenager and they have a smartphone, if you have a teenager who keeps a planner for school, you need to start working with them on how and where they need to be. I get 17-year-olds, 19-year-olds who are attending college and have absolutely no idea how to keep track of when things are due, what they need to do the days leading up to it, all of that. So take advantage, make that technology work for you. All right, let's talk about communication. I know you're surprised that I'm finally getting to communication, and I'm a speech pathologist, right? Communication is so very, very dynamic. We used to teach communication as this person says something, and then this person says something back, and then this person says something, and this person says something back. But the reality is much more, and you may not be able to see it way in the back, we are thinking, we are responding, we are predicting what we're going to talk about next. It is so, so dynamic. And as you might imagine, that creates additional challenges. And that doesn't even touch, that's just the actual language that you're exchanging. It doesn't even touch the hidden rules of how you talk about things and how you don't offend people and how to say something a little nicer than the way you might say it sometimes. So we are going to think the same way. We need to build prior knowledge. If you and your child are visiting aunts and uncles or friends in another state and they don't know that person well, it's time to pull out the photos. It's time to sit down and talk about what you're going to do while you're there, what will be fun, what they like. Prior knowledge and vocabulary for a context are so important. You're going to model, you're going to guide, you're going to practice, and then you'll transfer. So I have some bullets here about your communication, because today I'm not going to talk as much about your child in communication as I am going to talk about you. Monitor your quantity, and I'm hoping the professionals that you're working with are telling you that if your child's at a 2-word level, you should be at a 3-word level. If you're talking in paragraphs, in a focused, shared activity, probably most of it's going over their head if they're speaking at a 2-word level. And we talk too much, and we're going to talk about silence in just a minute. I'm also going to ask you to monitor your pace. Slow down. I don't have one child with an autism diagnosis that I've ever worked with that does not have some aspect of auditory processing deficits, okay? I can't tell you the clinical reason for that. I'm not a researcher, but in reality, that's the truth. And when we take off flying, they either tune us out. I always talk about Charlie Brown's teacher, wah, 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 wah. We need to slow down for them. Also, monitor your proximity and your presence. If I want my child to listen to me, I can't be across the room for most of the kids that I'm talking to. There's something on the wall that will take away their attention. There's something moving on the far side of them to take away their attention from what I'm saying. So you must move to what we call the zone of connection, and that's the optimal distance between you and the child so that the child can receive and give communication. If you're trying to get in the car in the morning, and you're in the kitchen and they're in the family room, and you're telling them to get their shoes, and they're not moving, a large part of it might be you're not in their zone. You have to move to their zone. Monitor volume. I'm by nature a loud person and somewhat animated with children. I have to tone it down for my teens because they're so cool that we wouldn't want to act that way. But I have to pull my voice down and be mindful of how they may be experiencing my loud voice. And so save your loud voice for when you really mean it, okay? Monitor your tone. We want to encourage, enthuse, and energize our communication just above where the child's is. If you have children who are passive or quiet, same rule. If you have children who model greater regularity, you would want to model greater regularity for children who are extremely passive, or the ones who are erratic and extreme in their communication. I'm over here, they're going, they're all over. We need to be what we want them to be. I'm going to talk about praise now. When I worked in the public schools, and I worked in buildings that had self-contained programs for children on the autism spectrum, and also children who were also participating in the general education settings as well. I can't tell you how many times a day I heard, "Good job, awesome," means nothing. Our children do not perceive that you are giving the praise because of the thing they just did. So be specific. You can add the good job and the awesome at the end of it, but for now, I want you to say, "I liked how you spoke up when you were talking to your classmates. You were friendly. That makes me happy." We need to tell them what they're getting right. And I've learned this so much more as, again, I've started working more and more with teens and young adults, and that by that age, they often have some very strong perceived distress over what they can't do. And I've seen this help children turn around and begin to believe in themselves more. Monitor your corrections. Instead of saying don't, and I'm hoping you guys already know this, instead of saying, "Don't do that to your sister," say, "I would like to see you make room on the seat for your sister." Or I'd like to see you share air with your sister. She's breathing my air. I had children, so I can say that legitimately. Again, I'm going to ask you to be what you want to see in them. Monitor your perspective. Help your child notice. I don't know if any of you have read the book, and I'm going to forget the author's name right now, I'm so sorry, about context blindness. Autism as context blindness. Anybody? There's a great book out there about that, and I don't think it's the perfect answer, but when I look at how often our children have difficulty with prior knowledge, I do see that they don't see how context impacts what happens between people. We behave differently in the library than we do in the grocery store or the park. And so you can start using words that help them understand what it means to do, to see, to think, or talk about how you're feeling. We also need to monitor expectations. If your child can't throw a pillow with you and catch it, we're not going to put a baseball in his hand. We need to meet the child where they are and move them to the next step. But one of the best ways to do that is throughout your day with your child or your teen, your young adult, is to give them meaningful roles. I push parents all the time. One of the first families I worked with in a parent coaching model had a 9-year-old, very with it 9-year-old, but certainly on the spectrum. And she wouldn't let him spread peanut butter with a butter knife. I said, what are you doing? He needs to be making his sandwich at night for school tomorrow. And in that model, parents make videos and I see them, and I could just see she was about to have a stroke about him holding that knife. We need to guide and let people have their expectations. All right, here comes the big one, silence. It's amazing, isn't it? Silence. Stop talking. Count to 10, count to 20. Make room for your child in the interaction. When we talk too much, we're deterring their learning about what reciprocal communication is. And one of the reasons I say silence based on practice, but I also found this research. And I'm going to read, I know that's terrible, but I don't think all of you have them in front of you. Luciano Bernardi conducted a study of the physiological effects of music. So they were playing symphonic pieces. And what they found, this is a summary of it, sound waves vibrate the bones in your ear, you guys know that, which transmit movement along the cochlea and hit the hair cells and cause a vibration that tells your brain what you're hearing. The body reacts immediately and powerfully to these signals, even in the middle of deep sleep. Neurophysiological research suggests that noises first activate the amygdala, clusters of neurons located in the temporal lobes of the brain, associated with memory, formation, and emotion. The activation prompts an immediate release of stress hormones like cortisol. So before we do this one, what he found in his research was that, you know, have you ever been to a symphony concert and the music has that little pause and everybody's going, should we clap, should we not clap? Yeah. He found that the longer the music went on, the less active the brain became. But when that silence came in, the brain started firing again in a whole new way, trying to sort it out, trying to figure it out, what's going on. And the brain was more engaged. So in 2010, Michael Ware, a researcher in sensory processing, reported very similar results, but there's an additional part to this that's so important. The onset of a sound prompts specialized network neurons in the auditory cortex to light up. But when sounds continue in a relatively constant manner, the neurons largely stop reacting. So when we're being Charlie Brown's teacher, wah, 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 guess what? Your children have tuned you out, literally. Those neurons have stopped working. But in his research, he replicated the findings, and remarkably, the auditory cortex has a separate network of neurons that fire when silence begins. When a sound suddenly stops, that's an event just as surely as when a sound starts. So there is research that says you will be helping your children. I'm extrapolating, I admit that, but I see it work all the time, that silence, by using silence, your children will think more and become better thinkers. This is one of my favorite quotes. Silence is an empty space, space in the home of the awakened mind. I don't know of a context where that means more than it means in the lives of families with children on the autism spectrum. Okay, let's talk a little bit about experience sharing communication. You can catch that part when you look up the handouts. I work with families to begin using dynamic communication. And what that looks like is you have to stop asking questions. When families come to my office for an evaluation, we often see that they are asking questions that the child already knows answers to. And so we start asking questions. Can I pull them in? Can I pull them in? Can I get them to talk? Can I speak? All of those things. And we start asking, inane questions. What color is this? What shape is this? What, blah, 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 blah. And we're working against ourselves. So I ask families to get rid of questions. Not all questions are bad, but those kinds of questions are not productive for your children. So we're going to ask you to move into that green zone where we're using experience sharing. I'll give you a quick example. We're going to use I statements. I'm not sure why you're hitting your sister. Silence. I feel like getting some strawberries out of the refrigerator. Silence. We are opening the space for the child to walk in, and we are not putting them on the spot that they may get the answer wrong, or you may be frustrated with them because they didn't respond. So we're going to work in that green zone much of our day. Now, there are indirect prompts, that's the yellow zone, that sound like declarative communication, but they're not. So let's say you're trying to get everybody in the car to leave in the morning, and you need your child to get their shoes. Instead of saying, go get your shoes, this is the 5th time I've asked you to go get your shoes on, please go get your shoes, could you get your shoes, please? Instead of doing that cycle, and I'm a mom, I did all of it, so I'm gonna look down at my shoes and say, I'm ready to go, I have my shoes on. Do I hope they go get their shoes? Absolutely. But in the green zone, a truly green zone is, I like the way your pink tennis shoes look with that outfit. That's experience sharing, and I'm going to ask you to be there. Remove questions, remove directives. And here's an example. There are many more. When I did this, when I first started doing this, I had to put a sign on my office door to walk into my therapy room that said, no questions. I had to teach myself. So this is not always easy, but I think it's very productive. I would like to invite you to look up these 2 articles. They're articles that I give to the families that I work with. The first one is talking about how not to talk to your kids and that we praise smarts, not effort, and that's counterproductive. And the other one is what price is privilege, and it's a great article. They're both a little lengthy, but they're important. All right, family first. Your house, your home, is the learning lab for your child until whatever time they launch, okay? Once again, we have to build prior knowledge. We've got to model, we have to guide, we have to practice, we have to transfer. Your guidance is so important to do things alongside your child. Now, I get that it's faster for you to sort the laundry. I get that it's faster for you to wash the strawberries. But doing those things with other people under their guidance is so, so important. All right, and that takes me to the work of Barbara Rogoff. Barbara Rogoff is a sociologist, and she went around the world in all types of cultures and looked for how did cultures develop dynamic thinking children. And in her book called Guided Participation, an apprenticeship model, she has a picture from another country with what I'm going to guesstimate is about a 3-year-old wielding a machete about this big. Did you all just take a breath? I did the very first time I saw it. But in that culture, that is part of their responsibility, and the parents guide for the child to participate. So her term, guided participation, teaches us that you have a very critical role. You pace your efforts based on their needs. You sustain a level of challenge that promotes real-world competence. Don't dumb it down. I'm sorry, please don't dumb it down. Your child can do all kinds of things that you haven't even discovered yet. And then we only maintain support for the child on an as-needed basis. That's the transfer part, where we begin to hand off more and more of the activity. This is played out in slowing your communication, choosing roles for your child at appropriate levels, breaking complex actions into small steps, anticipating the next developmental opportunity, and avoiding carrying too much of the child's responsibility in the process. That goes all the way back to emotional regulation, executive function, communication. It's all there. We do things all day long. Now, I happen to have put up here a number of things that are chores, and I'm not asking you to make your child an indentured servant. But when your child leaves home, no matter where they're going or who they're going to live out the remainder of their days with, they have to learn to live with people. And even our neurotypical kids are arriving at college, because of the affluence of our country, are arriving at college with no idea how to do these things. And we need to help them learn to do it. We don't have to teach them how to make pancakes from the start to the finish. Maybe we teach them how to sift the flour and add the milk. Next week, we'll sift the flour, we'll add the milk, and we'll crack the egg. You build it over time. We are not going to ask our children to do things. Guess what the answer is? Come on, guys, what's the answer? No. And you are backed against a wall then, and then it becomes a power struggle. We're going to invite, and we're going to be attractive in our invitations. I want us to do the puppy puzzle. Declarative communication. Assume your child is going to join you, and if you have to, guide them to participate with you. And in terms of things like chores, it's time to put the spoons away. If you're teaching your child how to unload the dishwasher, don't start with all 3 utensils, start with one of them, if that's all that your child can handle at this time. Be definitive, but be attractive. You're always going to look for a meaningful role. I put the learning tower in there. Do any of you have learning towers like this? It is the best thing you will spend money on in your home for your child if they are under the age of 6 or 7, okay? That platform there drops, and so they can be in the kitchen with you as they get a little bit taller. They are safe, they're encompassed, but they can also move. You're not worried about whether they're falling, and they can participate in kitchen things without you worrying about that they're about to fall and bust their head. All right. One of the things I would ask you to do is to think about your day from morning when you get up until everybody's in bed. And I know sometimes that's real late, but think about the verbs in your day. Prepare dinner, there's our verb. But within that, there's probably 10, 12 other verbs in there. So you can take one of those verbs and have your child be the one who washes the vegetables, and then you can finish the rest of the salad. And over time, you begin to expand it. Look at the language that's involved. Oh, did we get them clean? Are they still dirty? All kinds of language opportunities. I also ask you to manage the materials. People get all kinds of things all around them, and no wonder the kids can't pay any attention. If you walk in my office, one of the things you'll notice is I don't have stuff on my walls. And I work with kids out of bags, and I work with kids out of boxes so they can't see the things we're going to use. So you need to eliminate escapes. You need to eliminate stems. If you are working with character toys that your child loves, I'm going to ask you to put them away. We work with plain, ordinary toys, wooden blocks, all of those things, because that distraction is taking their ability to attend to you and the interaction away from them. And you need to be the most important thing in the room. Absolutely. So lots of good questions here. One of the ones that I find often why kids are always eloping is they don't have trunk support. You want them to sit there and play with you for 10 minutes, and there's nothing behind their back. Take time to explore those possibilities. So a good list of things you need to be asking yourself about working with your child. So we're going to arrive again that you cannot assume that one approach is going to meet all of this. Please don't assume that a professional is the only person who can bring your children along the path of growing into a meaningful adult life, whatever that means for him or her. So you have to work on prior knowledge and the vocabulary that goes with it. Model and guide. Please praise authentically and learn to transfer responsibility. I do want to credit everyone that my work comes from. And all of these people are people that I expect, and if you put that list on your computer, and when you find them speaking at a conference near you, I would encourage you to get out there and to hear them. Ladies, do we have time for questions, or do I need to be done? Okay. I will be here if anybody has any questions. Thank you so much for your attention today, and have a good rest of the day.